I heard the crack before I felt the pain. 1 second I was standing in our small Seattle apartment, reaching across the counter for a glass of water. The next, my father Victor's hand was locked around my wrist, wrenching and twisting with the full force of his rage. Something snapped inside my arm like a dry branch. The pain hit me a half-second later. White, blinding, total. My knees buckled and I hit the kitchen floor hard, gasping, unable to even scream properly. Victor stood over me. Whiskey breath, flat eyes. Not a trace of panic or regret. "That's what you get for being clumsy," he said. Then he walked to the couch and turned on the television. I lay there on the cold linoleum, clutching my arm, tears running sideways across my face. The physical pain was almost secondary. What cut deeper was the look in his eyes. Empty, unbothered. Like I was furniture he'd bumped into. This man was supposed to protect me. That was the deal. That was what fathers did. I pressed my forehead to the floor and made a silent promise to myself through the sobs. Whatever he was hiding, whatever dark thing lived underneath the surface of our family, I was going to find it, and I was going to drag every single piece of it into the light. The emergency room was cold and smelled like antiseptic. A doctor wrapped my arm while I stared at the ceiling, breathing through clenched teeth. Radial fracture. They fitted me with a cast that went from my wrist to just below my elbow. My mother Laura stood near the window, arms crossed tight over her chest, watching the door like she expected something dangerous to walk through it. When a nurse pulled me aside and asked, very quietly, whether anyone had hurt me on purpose, I opened my mouth. Laura stepped forward before I could speak. "She fell," Laura said firmly, "in the bathroom. It was an accident." The nurse held my gaze for a moment. She wrote something down. I looked away. On the drive home, nobody spoke for 20 minutes. Then Victor's text lit up Laura's phone on the dashboard. I read it before she could tilt the screen away. "Come home now. Or else." Laura's hands tightened on the wheel. She pressed the accelerator down. I watched the Seattle streetlights blur past the window. Laura was afraid of him. That much had always been true. But there was something else on her face tonight. Something heavier than fear. Something that looked a lot like a secret she had been carrying for a very long time. I was going to find out what it was. Victor was on the couch when we got home, a beer in his hand, acting like nothing had happened. He glanced at my cast and offered something between an apology and an accusation. "Sorry if I overreacted, but you know how you get on my nerves." And then turned back to the screen. I walked to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed until my breathing slowed. Then I picked up my phone and started going through old photo backups. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just needed to do something with my hands, something that felt like moving forward instead of falling apart. I found it in a folder from 3 years ago. A photo of a photo. Someone had taken a picture of a printed photograph. A woman I didn't recognize, smiling stiffly and written on the back in sharp, angry handwriting. "Stay away." My pulse jumped. Who was she? Why did we have this? A soft knock at my door made me flinch. Laura's face appeared in the gap, pale and urgent, her eyes scanning the hallway behind her before settling on mine. "Emily," her voice was barely a breath. "Don't dig into the past, please." She swallowed. "It's dangerous." She pulled the door shut before I could respond. I looked back at the photo on my screen. I was already digging, I found her name in under 20 minutes. The woman in the photo was named Kate Sillin. She had a small digital footprint, an old community forum account, a few tagged photos from years back. But linked through one of those photos was a news article that made my blood go cold. A house fire. Portland, 6 years ago. Ruled arson. The victim, a woman connected to a man whose name was redacted in the digitized version, had escaped with severe burns. She had given a statement to police, but later declined to press charges, citing fear of retaliation. I read the article 4 times. The timeline matched perfectly with a period when Victor had worked in Portland for 8 months. I remembered him coming home from that trip. I remembered Laura seeming relieved when he walked through the door, which had always confused me as a child. At dinner, I brought up Portland casually, said I'd seen a documentary about it. Watched Laura's face. She went the color of old paper. Victor didn't look up from his plate. "Never been," he said flatly. I said nothing else. That night, as I lay in the dark with my cast resting on a pillow, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Your dad isn't who you think he is. Meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything." The cafe was small, 2 blocks from school. I arrived early and chose a corner seat facing the door. The man who walked in was around 30, with careful eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from learning early that the world isn't safe. He sat across from me and said, "You look like him. I'm sorry for that." His name was Alex. He was my half-brother. Victor had abandoned him and his mother when Alex was barely 3 years old. After his mother died, Alex had spent years quietly following the trail of Victor's life, collecting what he found. What he found was a pattern. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were police reports, a court record of a suspended license, and a buried file on a fatal DUI crash. 9 years ago, Victor had run a red light while drunk and killed a 22-year-old named Patrick Hale. The toxicology report had been altered. Someone with a badge had made the evidence disappear. Patrick's family had never gotten justice. "He has people," Alex said quietly. "People who help him stay clean. Be careful." I tucked the folder into my backpack. When I stepped outside, I scanned the street automatically. Victor's black car was parked directly across from the cafe entrance. My legs kept moving. My face stayed calm. Inside, I was falling. I walked home at a normal pace, every muscle screaming to run. The folder felt like it weighed 50 pounds inside my backpack. I kept my eyes ahead and didn't look back at the car. Victor was in the kitchen when I got home. He looked at me the way a cat watches something it has already decided to catch. "Where were you?" he asked. "Library," I said. "Group project." He stared at me for a long time. Then he turned back to the stove. In my room, I read every page of Alex's file with the music turned up loud and a chair pushed against the door. The DUI crash had been horrific. Patrick Hale had been 22 years old on his way home from a late shift. Victor had walked away because someone on the local police force had swapped out the original toxicology results before the case was filed. 9 years. Patrick's family had been waiting 9 years for an explanation that never came. I opened my notebook and started writing down every name, every date, every case number. I was going to build something Victor couldn't escape, something airtight, something that would follow him forever. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate creak directly outside my bedroom door. Someone was standing right on the other side, very still, listening. I yanked the door open fast. Laura stumbled backward, her hand pressed over her mouth, her eyes full of tears that were about to spill over. "Come in," I said quietly. I closed the door behind her. What she told me came out in broken pieces, like she was handing me sharp things she'd been holding for years, and her palms were finally bleeding from the weight. Victor had raped her before they were married, when she was young and isolated and had nobody to turn to. She had stayed because he'd told her no one would believe her, because she had children to protect, because leaving had always felt more dangerous than endearing. Mia, my 8-year-old sister who laughed at her own jokes and drew butterflies on everything, had been born from that night. I held Laura while she cried. My own tears fell quietly into her hair. "We have to stop him," I said. She pulled back and looked at me, her face balanced between hope and terror. "He will destroy us, Emily." "He's already trying to," I said. We stayed up past 3 in the morning, whispering. When Laura finally slipped back to her room, I opened my laptop and wrote a long email to Alex. I didn't know yet that Victor had cracked the password on my old phone's backup account 2 days earlier. He had read everything. Alex's response arrived before sunrise, and it made me feel physically sick. Victor had fathered 8 children by 4 different women. Alex had located 5 of them. Most had grown up with nothing, raised by mothers who were too frightened or too exhausted to pursue him legally. 2 had tried. Neither had succeeded. I started recording Victor's evenings after that. He drank every night after dinner, and when he drank, he talked, loud, careless, unguarded. I set my phone behind a stack of books on the living room shelf, with the screen facing the wall and the record function running. On the 4th night, he was on the phone with someone laughing. I crept to the hallway doorway and pressed my back against the wall. "She never proved a thing," Victor said, voice thick and loose. I made sure of that. The fire did exactly what I needed it to do. I stopped breathing. He was talking about Kate, laughing about nearly killing her. I backed away silently. My hands were shaking. I had it on recording. His own voice, unprompted, no question of context. Then a small voice came from behind me. "Emily?" Mia stood in the hallway in her pajamas, rubbing one eye. "What's wrong with Dad?" I turned around and made myself smile. "Nothing, Bug. Go back to bed." I had to protect her. That became the most urgent thing I'd ever felt in my life. I enrolled Mia in 2 after-school programs the following week: art club on Tuesdays, swim lessons on Thursdays. She was thrilled. I acted like it was a treat. In reality, I was building hours of distance between her and what was coming. I called Rebecca next. She was a family friend who had passed the bar 2 years earlier and handled domestic cases. I told her everything in one long, breathless phone call, pacing Rebecca's tiny kitchen while she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What you have is significant," she said carefully, "but we need to make it impossible to dismiss before you move." She pulled public records while I gathered more audio. Within a week, she'd found 3 probation violations Victor had somehow avoided consequences for. Our case was growing teeth. Then everything shifted. Victor cornered me in the hallway one evening. Sober, eyes clear and cold in a way that was somehow worse than drunk. "I know you've been recording me," he said softly. He grabbed my phone before I could react and smashed it against the wall. Pieces scattered across the floor. He leaned down close to my face. "You think you can outsmart me," he said. "I have buried smarter people than you." I met his eyes and said nothing, but my backup files were already saved securely in the cloud. He had just smashed a phone with nothing on it. I reached out carefully using a private account with no connection to my real name. Alex helped me locate 2 of Victor's other daughters, Priya and Camille, both in their 20s, both carrying damage. I recognized immediately when we spoke, Priya had grown up in poverty after Victor disappeared from her mother's life. Camille had spent years in therapy after Victor showed up drunk to her high school graduation and caused a scene that ended with security escorting him out while she stood at the podium, frozen with shame. We built a shared digital evidence folder, police reports, audio recordings, financial documents Alex had pulled, personal testimonies written out carefully, time-stamped and witnessed. Then I went into Victor's home office late one night, moving slow, socked feet on the hardwood. Laura had pressed a copied key into my hand without a word. In the back of a filing cabinet, behind a row of old tax folders, I found it. A handwritten letter, dated 9 years ago. Victor's own handwriting confessing that he had paid someone to alter Patrick Hale's toxicology report before the case went to file. His own words. His own guilt. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the letter. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway, moving deliberately toward the closed office door. The handle began to turn. The door swung inward. My heart stopped completely. It was Alex. He pressed one finger to his lips, grabbed my arm, and pulled me toward the window I had left cracked from the inside. We slipped out onto the fire escape and climbed down into the cold Seattle night without making a sound. Victor's suspicion detonated the next morning. By noon, every lock in the apartment had been replaced. He didn't say anything to me directly. He didn't need to. 2 days later, I packed a duffel bag and moved into Rebecca's spare room. Laura called me every day in whispers from the bathroom with the water running. She had started pulling documents from hiding places she had been keeping for years. Hospital records from the night Victor had raped her, with his name on the admissions paperwork, with notes in the attending doctor's handwriting. She had been collecting quietly, terrified, waiting for exactly the right moment to hand them over. That moment had arrived. I posted an anonymous teaser on a large public forum. No names, just the outline of what was coming. I watched the comments multiply within hours. Hundreds of people sharing their own stories, expressing disbelief, expressing rage. Then Rebecca's landline rang. A voice I didn't recognize, cold and flat. "Stop now," it said, "or your family pays the price." The line went dead before I could respond. Rebecca traced the call. It came from a burner phone linked to a name that matched one of Victor's oldest known associates, a man with a history of petty criminal work across 3 states. It was meant to terrify me into stopping. Instead, it confirmed we were close enough to matter. Alex spent 2 days teaching me encrypted file storage, secure communications, and how to back up evidence across multiple separate locations so that no single point of failure could erase what we had built. We worked until past midnight, drinking bad coffee at Rebecca's kitchen table. Then I contacted Kate Sillen directly. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop 40 minutes outside Seattle. When I walked in, she was already there, hands wrapped around a mug, burn scars running along her left forearm in pale, uneven lines. She told me everything. Victor had set the fire himself in the early hours of the morning while she slept. She had woken to smoke pouring under the bedroom door and escaped through a window, cutting her hands on broken glass. He had done it because she had threatened to report him to police about the DUI. The horror sat between us like something solid. On the drive back, my phone rang. Mia's voice came through tiny and scared. "Emily, Dad is really frightening tonight. When is this going to be over?" I gripped the steering wheel hard. "Soon," I told her. "I promise you, very soon." The police showed up at Rebecca's door on a Tuesday evening. 2 officers, apologetic expressions, a tip about stolen documents belonging to Victor. Rebecca handled it like she had been waiting for exactly this move. She presented her bar credentials, explained she was my legal representative, and asked the officers calmly to identify the specific documents and the precise date of the alleged theft. They couldn't. The tip collapsed under 10 minutes of professional, polite questioning. They left without incident. That same night, Rebecca filed a restraining order on my behalf. Grounds: the broken arm, Victor's threatening message, the parking lot confrontation Alex had witnessed. Victor was required to appear in court to respond. He showed up furious. His behavior in the courtroom, muttering at his own lawyer, visibly glaring at the judge during testimony, was noted on the record by the judge herself. Rebecca pulled his complete driving history through public records requests. 3 DUI incidents spanning 12 years. 2 had resulted in minor penalties only. I quietly launched a private forum for Victor's victims. Within 72 hours, 16 people had joined. One of the new members was a woman named Diane, who had documented evidence that Victor had left a toddler alone in a car during a summer heat wave while he drank at a bar across the street. Victor's employer had begun asking questions. Rumors had started spreading at his workplace, quiet but persistent, like smoke finding its way under a door. Victor's employer placed him on administrative review. I had sent their HR department an anonymous, carefully worded message containing only publicly available court records and 1 newspaper article. Not a single fabricated word. I didn't need to invent anything. Reality was more than sufficient. Laura left him 4 days later. She packed 2 bags while he was at work, took Mia by the hand, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. They moved into her sister's house across the city. When Victor called that evening, screaming, I was sitting beside Laura on her sister's couch. She put the phone on speaker. He threatened her by name. He threatened me by name. He said things that made even Rebecca's expression harden when she listened to the recording afterward. Alex contacted me the same night with new information. Victor had been systematically skimming from expense accounts at 2 previous employers over 7 years. Small amounts, carefully timed, designed to avoid triggering automatic audits. But added together across the full period, the total reached nearly $40,000. Financial fraud to add to the pile. Arson, covered-up manslaughter, rape, abuse, child abandonment, financial theft. Each item documented, each one attached to real evidence with real dates. Then, that night, Victor vanished. He didn't return to the apartment. He left a single piece of paper on the kitchen table. It said, "You'll regret this." Laura photographed the note and sent it to me immediately. I forwarded it to Rebecca, who contacted police within the hour. Given the full context of what was already on file, officers took it seriously and began a search. It took them 36 hours to find Victor. He was staying at a rundown motel at the edge of the city, the kind of place that accepted cash and asked no questions. Police questioned him there, but without an active arrest warrant, they couldn't hold him. He performed cooperative and reasonable for 20 minutes and walked back to his room. That same evening, I went public. Not with my name, not yet. On a large forum with a dedicated domestic abuse awareness community, I posted a detailed, carefully written thread laying out the full timeline, names redacted, documents included with identifying details blurred. I wrote calmly and let the evidence speak for itself. Within 48 hours, the thread had been viewed over 60,000 times. A journalist from a regional investigative outlet reached out to Rebecca requesting an on-record interview. Then Alex called. There was another half-sibling neither of us had known about, a 20-year-old named Theo, living 3 states away, who had found the forum post and recognized details only Victor's child could recognize. Theo had evidence of his own. His mother had been keeping records for years, quietly, patiently, waiting for exactly this. We were almost ready to finish it. Rebecca submitted the full evidence package to 2 separate investigators, one at the county prosecutor's office, one at a state financial crimes unit. Everything organized and cross-referenced. The arson documentation, the covered-up DUI, the embezzlement records, Laura's hospital files, Kate's statement, Diane's records, Alex's compiled history, Theo's new materials. Victor's probation officer revoked his supervised status within days, citing the threatening note and the motel disappearance as direct violations. His employer terminated him. Laura filed for divorce. She sat at Rebecca's kitchen table to sign the papers, and when she set down the pen, she exhaled like someone releasing a breath held for 15 years. My cast had come off the week before. I flexed my fingers slowly, feeling nothing but strength. Then Victor's lawyer filed a defamation suit against me and Rebecca, a desperate move designed to bury us in legal costs and intimidate us into silence. The court date was set. I walked into that first hearing with Rebecca on my left, Alex on my right. Priya and Camille were seated in the gallery. Laura and Mia waited on a bench outside. I scanned the courtroom as I settled into my seat. In the front row of the public gallery, arms folded, burn scars visible along her left forearm, sat a woman I had only met once, in a coffee shop 40 minutes outside the city. Kate Sillen had come to testify. Kate stood at the witness stand and did not waver for a single second. She described the night of the fire in exact detail. The smell of accelerant through the floorboards, the locked front door, the bedroom window she had broken with her elbow to get out. She described the months before, when Victor had warned her that going to police about the DUI would be the worst decision of her life. She described learning, weeks after the fire, through a mutual contact, that Victor had reported it as an electrical fault before investigators even arrived on scene. The courtroom was completely silent. Victor sat at the defense table with his jaw set and his eyes fixed somewhere above Kate's head. I took the stand next. My voice did not shake. I described the night he broke my arm. The whiskey smell, the sound of the crack, the linoleum cold against my cheek, the 8 words he said walking away. I watched the faces in the jury box change. As I spoke, something shifted in the room like pressure dropping before a storm. Victor's lawyer attempted cross-examination. Rebecca had prepared me for every possible angle. I answered each question clearly, without hesitation, without flinching once. By the time we recessed, cameras were waiting outside the courthouse doors. The story was already spreading across local media. Social media had ignited. Inside, through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of Victor pushing through a side exit. He was running. Again. He didn't make it far this time. An old friend of Victor's named Dale, who Victor had called asking for a false alibi, had recorded the conversation without telling him. Dale had done bad things for Victor over the years. He had carried that weight long enough. He walked into Rebecca's office the next morning and set the recording on the desk with both hands, carefully, like putting down something that had been burning him. "I'm done," Dale said quietly. "I should have done this years ago." The recording was extraordinary. Victor explicitly asked Dale to tell investigators they had been together on the night of the arson. Dale could be heard asking why it mattered now, after so long. Victor said clearly and without hesitation, "Because they're finally coming for me." Arrest warrants were issued the following day. Arson with intent to harm, financial fraud, probation violation, obstruction of justice. Victor was taken into custody by early afternoon. The forum post I had published 2 weeks earlier now had over 200,000 views. The comment section was overwhelming. Thousands of people sharing their own stories, expressing grief, expressing fury, expressing something that looked like collective relief. Then 2 days after Victor's arrest, security footage from a grocery store parking lot captured him approaching me from behind, reaching toward my arm, saying "please" over and over. I stepped back. The camera caught everything. The footage was submitted to the file the same afternoon. I visited Victor in the holding facility one time, not for his sake. I went because I needed to see him from the other side of a table with no power difference between us. I needed to look at him and feel solid ground underneath my feet instead of the linoleum of our apartment kitchen. He looked smaller, older. His hands, folded on the table, were completely still for once. He apologized in several different ways, rearranging the same words each time, like he was searching for a combination that would unlock something in me. I sat across from him and listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked to the door. That was the last time we were ever in the same room. A documentary producer reached out to Rebecca the following week, a woman with a track record of survivor-centered films who had been following the case through media coverage. She wanted to tell the story of Victor's victims as a collective, with each person controlling what they shared and how. Priya, Camille, and Theo agreed immediately. Alex said yes, provided Mia's face was never shown. Laura said she needed a few days to think, then called back and said yes. As the trial date approached, headlines multiplied. Victor's full name appeared attached to every piece of wreckage he had left behind, publicly and permanently. There was nowhere left to hide. The trial lasted 9 days. The prosecution moved through the evidence in methodical sequence: the fatal DUI and its cover-up, the arson, the embezzlement, the abuse, and the rape, document after document, recording after recording. Kate, Dale, Diane, Theo's mother, Laura, voice steady and clear, looking at the jury instead of at Victor. The defense tried 3 separate strategies across those 9 days. None of them held together under cross-examination. On the final day, the jury took 4 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on 7 counts: felony assault, arson with intent to harm, financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and 3 counts connected to the DUI fatality, including evidence tampering. Outside the courthouse, I stood in autumn sunlight surrounded by people I had come to love completely. Laura, Alex, Priya, Camille, Theo, Rebecca, and Mia, 17 years old now, holding a handmade sign she had drawn the night before. It said in big, careful letters, "We won." I held all of them at once and cried, without embarrassment for the first time in years. Then one final piece surfaced during sentencing preparation. Investigators found a series of accounts holding assets Victor had accumulated through fraud over 2 decades. Under state law, those assets were subject to forfeiture. They would be liquidated. The proceeds designated for reparations, for every person he had damaged, for all of us. The reparations process took several months. When my check arrived, I sat with the envelope in my hands for a long time before opening it. It felt strange, like receiving something that had been taken in a form I barely recognized. I used most of it for college, business law. I already knew exactly what I wanted to do. Victor filed 2 appeals. The second brought in a new legal team that challenged the admissibility of Dale's recording. During that process, 3 additional women came forward from other cities, each with testimony that added weight to an already overwhelming case. Both appeals were denied. Laura met someone the following spring, a quiet, steady man named Ben, who helped Mia with her homework and had never once raised his voice inside their home. I sat at their dinner table one evening, watching Mia laugh so hard at something Ben said that she knocked over her water glass, and felt something unclench in my chest that had been wound tight since I was 16 years old. Alex launched a support group for adult children of abusive parents. It was funded partly by a nonprofit grant and partly by donations that arrived after the documentary aired. Within its first year, over 400 members had joined from across the country. Policy advocates used our case to push for stronger mandatory reporting guidelines at Seattle area hospitals and emergency rooms. A proposal was introduced. It passed. Victor began his 11-year sentence in a facility 2 hours north of the city. In his first year, I heard through Rebecca that Victor had filed a petition for early consideration, claiming rehabilitation progress. The parole board declined it without extensive deliberation. I graduated at the top of my first-year law cohort. 2 professors wrote recommendation letters. A local paper ran a brief feature about my academic record alongside my advocacy work. Victor's name was not in it. I was the story. Laura's journey became its own kind of quiet inspiration. She began speaking at a domestic violence shelter across the city, sitting across from women who reminded her of herself a decade earlier. She was honest about her fear, her silence, her years of staying. The women in those groups didn't judge her. They recognized every word she said. A publisher approached her about a memoir. She called me before responding. "Do it," I said immediately without hesitation. One afternoon, a letter arrived at Rebecca's office addressed to me in a handwriting I recognized the second I saw the envelope. I left it sitting on the kitchen counter for 2 days. Then I opened it. 3 pages. Victor's apology, each sentence constructed carefully to sound genuine. I read every word. I wanted to understand it fully before I decided what to do with it. Then I carried it out to the small backyard behind Rebecca's house, dropped it into the metal fire bowl she used for winter evenings, and struck a match. I watched it become ash. Then I went inside and made dinner. 4 years passed. They were the best years of my life. I graduated with honors and took a position at a nonprofit legal firm specializing in domestic violence cases. I worked with survivors who had no money, no connections, and no map for how to fight back. I knew every fear they described from the inside. I knew what it felt like to be on a cold kitchen floor wondering if anyone in the world was going to believe you. I spoke at conferences twice a year. The first time, my voice trembled through the opening 3 sentences and then steadied. Every time after that, I walked to the microphone without hesitation. My siblings, all of them, became a real family. We had a group chat that ran constantly, full of arguments about restaurants and inside jokes and photos of Mia doing increasingly impressive things at school. We gathered every summer, rotating cities. Mia was 15 and had decided she wanted to study marine biology. She still drew butterflies on everything. Victor's earliest possible release date came up in our legal tracking system 2 months before it arrived. Rebecca and I submitted a detailed letter to the parole board with supporting documentation from multiple prosecutors. We were not the only ones who submitted letters. The board denied the request. I felt not triumph when I got the news, but something quieter and more lasting. Relief. The kind that lets you breathe all the way down. When Victor was eventually released after serving nearly 9 of his 11 years, the media briefly revived the story. Several reporters reached out to me for comment. I declined all of them. He returned to Seattle with a permanent public record that appeared on the first page of any search for his name. Weekly check-ins with a probation officer. Employment attempts that didn't last. Laura's memoir, published the previous year and reviewed in 3 national outlets, had not included his photograph. Everyone who knew the story knew exactly who she was describing. I gave a TED Talk in my 4th year of advocacy work. The topic was the difference between revenge and exposure. Revenge, I said, is about making someone feel your pain. Exposure is about refusing to let truth stay buried in the dark, where it grows and destroys quietly. One is about the past. The other is about the future. The recording was shared widely over the following months. Millions of views, eventually. Thousands of messages from people who wrote to say something in them had shifted after watching it. A half-sibling I hadn't known existed reached out through the documentary's outreach page. Victor's youngest, a boy of 12 living with his mother in another state. I wrote back the same day. We began talking regularly. He was sharp and funny and careful in a way that broke my heart a little and gave me enormous purpose at the same time. Then Camille's wedding invitation arrived in a cream envelope with gold lettering. I bought a dress and said yes without a second's hesitation. I got married 2 years later on a Tuesday afternoon in June in a small garden with the people I loved standing in a loose circle around us. Alex walked me down the aisle. Mia, who was 17 and determined to hold herself together, made it almost to the vows before she gave up pretending and just let herself cry. Laura sat in the front row beside Ben, squeezing his hand, and when I caught her eye, she pressed her fingers to her lips and opened her palm toward me. like releasing something she had been holding for a very long time. I founded a legal aid organization the following year and named it after Patrick Hale, the young man Victor had killed and whose family had spent 9 years waiting for his name to mean something in a courtroom. The foundation provided free legal representation to abuse survivors in 3 states. Within 2 years, it had handled over 300 cases. I thought about that kitchen floor sometimes, the cold linoleum, the sound of the crack, Victor's boots walking away. 8 words. I thought about the girl lying there, sobbing, certain nobody was coming. I know now what I would tell her. I would tell her that help was coming, that she was going to build it herself, piece by careful piece, with her own hands, and the hands of every person he had tried to break along the way. I would tell her the truth always wins eventually. Victor was ruined. We were free. And we did it with nothing but the truth.